Hello, my name is Ira Shor. I'm a professor at the City University of New York Graduate School, and I recently retired and am now professor emeritus. I wrote a book with Paolo Friere, the first talking book he did with a collaborator, and it was published in 1986 here in the States in English, and it was called "The Pedagogy for Liberation." That book was published the next year in Brazil as Medo e Ousadia, Fear and Courage, the Everyday Life of the Teacher. And in addition, it was went on to be translated into Chinese, into Hebrew, into Greek, into Catalan, and so on. So it's been a book that many teachers have found useful, and I'm very grateful that I was able to do the first one with Paolo Friere. So here's the story of how I came to write the book and how important Paolo Friere was to my life as a teacher and to so many other teachers in the North. I was an activist student in the 1960s in college and graduate school, involved in the many movements of that time, which were anti-imperialist and against the Vietnam War. They were also for civil rights and for women's equality and for gay equality, for which I marched. And we were also very preoccupied with environmentalism and the trouble the planet was getting into. I also helped organize a labor union for graduate teaching assistants. So at that time, I came of age in the movements of that period when so many millions of young people had high expectations and great hopes that we could rescue the planet and end injustice and end poverty and end racism. And it was a great time to be young and to come of age with such high expectations. It's a wonderful way to get launched into adult life. So when I finished my PhD, I got a job as an assistant professor at a Staten Island community college, a college of white working class students in the City University of New York. And I started teaching, and I had no preparation, no training for being a critical teacher. So I was fumbling around, trying this and trying that. One day, I was in the cafeteria, and I just intuited somehow that I should bring hamburgers to class. I wasn't happy with the way the class was going. I was frustrated and impatient with my own teaching. So I brought hamburgers to class and passed them around. And it was a revelation. It was so exciting. This object from everyday life suddenly sparked such interest among the students, and they wrote about the hamburger, they debated the hamburger. I asked questions, why do we eat so many hamburgers, and so on. And I began to learn how to be a teacher who asks questions rather than providing answers. And so this taught me to describe critical teaching as a process for the students to extraordinarily re-experience ordinary life. That whatever was ordinary, we lived, but we didn't critically examine. So I discovered that I could bring or could pose ordinary objects or events from everyday life and put them on the table in the classroom for study. So I went from the study of hamburgers, then I asked the students to do a critical inquiry into the classroom chair that we were sitting in. It was uncomfortable, it was fiberglass, it was too small for us. And I learned to ask, does the president of the college sit in a chair like this? If you could choose a chair that you would want for yourself in the classroom, what would it look like? Why did the college buy so many of these uncomfortable chairs for us? Do students at fancy colleges like Harvard or so on sit on chairs like this? And so on. We were an underfunded, third-rate community college for white working class students mostly, and it was underinvestment in their development. So then I began to ask them to pose questions or pose themes or everyday contents for critical study, and they wanted to write a small book on cars. Then they wanted to write more about the theme of kids cursing and so on. So I went on like this, and a colleague who knew what I was trying to experiment with said, there's the Brazilian philosopher named Paolo Friere who writes about this. So I got Paolo's books, and I read them, and I discovered that this was like sunshine like sunrise. It was such a great window opening into a way of talking about this approach. And I studied his ideas of generative words and generative themes, and how we had to let the students be our teachers. We had to learn from them what mattered to them and how they spoke and their community culture and lives. And I began to study what Paolo meant by dialogic problem posing, and how important it was for the classroom to be dialogue based and not lecture based, and what it meant to pull out from students their thoughts about the material rather than me transferring my knowledge to them. So in all these regards, Paolo's books have been extremely important to many of us here in the North. And we consider Paolo Friere Brazil's gift to the rest of the world, because he taught us what we needed to know, the foundations for critical pedagogy, so that we could teach for social justice, to question the status quo, to work for democracy, equality, ecology, and peace, and that we know that there is so much injustice and so much poverty and inequality in the world, that we want to be moral teachers, that education is always developing the people that we teach for and teach with. We want to develop them into citizens of the world who take into their own hands, as Paolo put it, the responsibility to make their own history, that they become civic activists and learn how to look at all the conditions of their life, understand how it got like this, and what we need to do to change it so that it becomes a world less cruel and more humane, in the words of Paolo Friere. Thank you.